Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Acting President. The need to understand why the Japanese pay less for our gas than we do. The Japanese consumer pays less for our gas than the Australian consumer. We need to understand why, if we are to do something about it. In May 2017, the price for gas per unit was Tokyo $7.11, Sydney $10.05, Adelaide $9.34, Brisbane $9.82, Melbourne $9.50. The fact the Japanese consumer pays less for our gas than we do is even more shocking when you consider their price of $7.11 also includes things we don't pay for, like turning the gas into a liquid so it can be shipped, the shipping cost, and finally the payment of an import duty to the Japanese government. Another shocking fact is that the Japanese government estimates it will, over the next 4 years, make $2.9 billion from the import duty on Australian gas, while we make nothing, with the exception of a royalty on the North West Shelf project. So not only does the Japanese consumer pay less than we do for gas, but their government makes more than our government does on Australian gas. What has gone wrong? Can we do anything about it? I ask myself how it is possible the Australian, as one of the largest exporters of gas in the world, has a gas shortage and the world's highest gas prices. The answer is simple. Firstly, we lack a disclosure regime which would require companies to provide information on average production costs, average sales costs, and reserves based on a standard oil price. This means petroleum companies have all the information and the governments have only part of the story, making it impossible to develop sound policies. The government and Treasury are overly reliant on what business tells them. Secondly, we have given away our natural gas resources for peppercorns, with the result the owners of our gas, foreign-owned multinationals and some Australian companies keep the domestic just short enough of gas to maximise prices. Thirdly, we accept a situation where foreign-owned petroleum multinationals pay more in political donations to the major parties than they pay in corporate income tax. In 2015-16, Chevron paid no corporate income tax, but they did manage to pay $53,365 to the Liberal Party and $44,950 to the Labor Party. Finally, the government is reluctant to address failed policies of the past because it worries the Australians' reputation will be damaged by changing the rules after investment decisions have been made, even though foreign-owned multinationals have breached their social contract with Australia through decades of non-payment of corporate income tax. The problem is we already have a sovereign risk because our gas and electricity prices are the highest in the developed world, causing loss of competitiveness and jobs. Once we lose manufacturing jobs, we won't get them back. The government needs to decide whether it will choose Australians over foreign-owned multinationals. We are at a tipping point where high gas prices and uncertainty about gas supply are causing Australian manufacturers like Brickworks to import bricks, and they are evaluating whether to move our production offshore, possibly Malaysia. The tragedy of high gas prices and shortages is that it could have been prevented. All we needed was good government policy, but I am here to say it may not be too late, although we will never really see low gas prices again. I want to see a 10% royalty regime put in place on all gas projects where none now exists. In this way, we will see some payment for our gas. I want to see an Australian domestic gas reservation policy introduced, which will mean that 15% of all gas in Commonwealth waters and not already covered by the West Australian domestic gas reservation policy be provided to the government at cost price. This will increase the supply of gas in the long term and lower prices. We need to build import gas terminals so we can bring cheap gas from areas of Western Australia to the east coast. I commend the AGL Energy Company for their feasibility study, which will see the first gas import terminal in Australia. Unfortunately, the gas they plan to import from other countries, it is cheaper than ours, will not be available until 2021. I ask the government to abandon plans to spend $60 million on unconventional and costly gas in the eastern states and divert that money to encourage the building of another gas import terminal. In September 2016, the largest floating liquid gas plant and storage facilities, called Prelude FLNG, moored in Commonwealth water. It is not too late to require this project to be subject to a domestic gas reserve policy because they need government approval to anchor in Commonwealth water. The policy of not ring-fencing petroleum resort rent tax (PRRT) credits to the exploration project, where the expenses were incurred, is costing us billions of dollars in revenue. Let us be clear about the mountain of PRRT credits owned by multinationals will mean no corporate income tax will ever be paid for our offshore gas projects. It is common knowledge the electricity and gas prices are increasing at a rate beyond the capacity of individuals and businesses to pay. If the government does not intervene in a meaningful way in the next few weeks, when the Turnbull government will allow Australia to sleepwalk into recession. Pensioners cannot continue to pay 11% of their non-discretionary income on gas and electricity. Australians in work cannot manage electricity and gas bills that double from one quarter to the next. I'm not interested in clean energy targets. I want gas and electricity prices brought down right now, so Australian businesses can stay in business and so Australians will have jobs. Small businesses like a fish and chip shop cannot pay $7,000 a quarter for electricity and survive. Small hotels in rural towns plus cannot pay $17,500 plus a quarter for electricity and keep the doors open. We have a national emergency and drastic measures are required. Nothing is working, including the partnership between the industry and government known as EMO. The Australian Energy Market Operator is 60% owned by government and 40% industry. EMO has failed Australians and the government stands by and lets it continue. EMO failed to change the electricity rule when China Light and Power, who owns 30% of Australia's electricity generation, blocked the change from 30 minutes to 5 minutes, which means Australians pay too much for electricity. Once again, the sale of our precious assets to foreigners is costing us dearly. These critical assets should never have been sold, and we must stop any future sales. We face a national emergency. Will the government wait for an energy policy-induced recession to take place in Australia, or will it act now? I will be seeking the support of like-minded crossbench senators to take the necessary action to pull back from the disaster. I will be discussing with them a jointly sponsored private senator's bill to enact a domestic gas reserve policy. We hear it daily on our people on radios and people talking across the country and just talking to people in general on the streets. They cannot continue the way they're going. Businesses are shutting. The rising cost in electricity and gas is devastating to a lot of families, pensioners, everyone right across our country. I have sat down and I have spoken to the Minister Canavan with regards to this. He was enlightened on quite a few issues because he knew nothing about it. And I think it's important that if we are going to be able to provide gas at a reasonable price for all Australians and industries and manufacturing, because manufacturing consume and use about 30% of gas, we need to provide it at a cheap, reliable, affordable price. And we need to build more terminals, and we need to be able to say, you want our gas from WA, you have to give us at least 15% before you can actually ship it out of this country and make more out of it from other countries.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I rise to speak to Senator Hanson's important matter of public importance. Look at the crocodile tears flowing in this chamber. There is only one party that is the party of cheap energy, and that is Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Currently, Australian consumers actually pay around 60% more for our own gas than Japanese customers do in Japan. This is doubly difficult to understand, as in order to be exported, Australian gas first has to be liquefied. That should increase the price by around 25%. And it's fine to hear Senator Xenophon, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party and the Greens especially talking about energy prices. But they caused this. Coming back to gas, just like runaway power costs, Australian working families are being ripped off with sky-high gas prices due to over-regulation forcing decrease in supply and an increase in prices. Regulation also decreases competition, which leads to overcharging by a cartel of Santos, Origin and BHP. With less regulation, though, customers would pay less and companies would earn more. Further costs are being added by the quasi-monopoly control of gas transmission pipelines, mainly by the APA Group, which, looking at a map, controls around 95% of the gas pipelines in this country. That would show a return on equity. Their return on equity of some pipelines is as high as 159%, enabled by government regulation. No wonder they call Australia Treasure Island, Mr Acting Deputy President. So why does this situation occur? Maybe because instead of tax, gas cartel members pay political donations to the major parties, as Senator Hanson itemised. We need to remove restrictions on supply and demand. That would encourage efficiency. As Senator Hanson has said, we clearly need to allow companies to build gas import terminals, including revaporising plants on the East Coast, to allow us to transport our own gas around the continent and then return it to domestic consumption. Transport costs from West Australia to the East Coast would be around 70 cents per gigajoule, and revaporising costs would be around 75 cents per gigajoule. This would allow us to import gas, which is currently selling for less than $4 a gigajoule, in comparison to the Sydney spot price now of $10. The impact on our economy and living standards of runaway gas prices cannot be overstated. On top of the spiralling electricity prices created by the obsession with expensive and unreliable intermittent wind and solar power, the current failed policies of the government, the opposition, the Greens and the Xenophon Party must be changed as a matter of urgency before our economic growth grinds to a halt. Only One Nation is the party of cheap energy, Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party.